Hi everybody, I'm Ralph Benmergui. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi, a podcast where I clearly say I'm not a rabbi, but if I was, I wouldn't be that kind of rabbi. Which brings me to today's episode, I might add. I'll tell a little story. Rabbis are supposed to tell stories. So the story goes that I was in a program for the Aleph ordination program to be a mashpiach in the hashpa'ah program, a spiritual director, which is something I do now. One of the things I do is counsel one-on-one and do group workshops on aging and saging and the like. While I was in that, I met a whole cohort of people. I was, I think, except for one of the rabbis who was teaching, the only Canadian in the room. And I sat with my brothers and sisters and learned to love so many of them. And one day I was sitting beside one I'd taken a particular shine to. I just thought he was just an interesting and wonderful person. And we were both sitting there, and it had been a long day of, talks and circles and practicums and all these beautiful things on our 3-year journey. And we were in Portland, just outside of Portland, Oregon, at a retreat center. It was a Christian retreat center, actually. And we were looking out the window, and there were some trees and woods on the other side of a creek, and a bald eagle came and landed. And I noticed it, and my seatmate didn't. And I said, "Zelig, there's like a bald eagle there." And he turned to me and he said, "Oh, that's some good medicine." And I said, "I'd never thought of it that way." And I realized, indeed, it was good medicine, and I quite enjoyed it. I did the 3-year course, and off I went. Zelig kept going. He went to Israel, studied at yeshiva for a while, and entered the ordination program to become a rabbi. Now, I will say that before all that, he was an environmental lawyer, a good one, and enjoyed the work to a degree, but always felt it wasn't quite the right target for his life, and spent some time with First Nations people in the United States, learning from them and their wisdom, and found himself very much attached to more of an embodied kind of Judaism, a Judaism that was really rooted in where your feet land, the earth. And over the years, I've watched what he's done from a distance, and what he does is Wilderness Torah. And it's a fascinating thing. There's a website, and we'll talk about that and all that. But I just really realized that it was time for he and I to reconvene without bald eagles and just spend some time together. So he is indeed my guest this time on Not That Kind of Rabbi. So Rabbi Zelig Golden, welcome.
Thank you, old friend. Thank you, Ralph, for inviting me here. It's good to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. There's a lot to talk about, but I wanted to start with a fundamental idea that I originally encountered through Rabbi Arthur Wasco, where he spoke about ideas like eco-kosher and eco-spirituality and wonderful things. And when I look through what you've been doing, the idea is earth-based Judaism. So I thought it would be really interesting and good for people to hear from you about what that means. What does earth-based Judaism look like?
It might be worth starting with the distinction that there's Jewish environmentalism, which is applying Jewish wisdom and sourcing Jewish values on how to live an environmentally sound life, how to inform environmental policy, etc. And then there's the culture of being a human being on planet Earth. And when I speak about earth-based Judaism, I'm really speaking more about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a culture, what it means to be a society. And in particular, looking at Judaism and understanding that Judaism is an ancient culture, and it's a culture with deep roots in place, and that those roots in place have been disrupted repeatedly through history. So as my teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomri, may his memory be a blessing, he said that Judaism is a PTSD religion, and I've really come to understand the deep truth of that. That because of the discontinuities, because of the uprootedness, because of exile, we've lost the basic connections to the place where we began, where we formed, where we became a people. And it's both for cultural reasons, both for the health of people reasons, but also because of the times we're in ecologically. We need to remember that we are part of the tribes that are earth people. And so and when we begin to remember that, it's you don't have to dig very deep, but our traditions are very much connected to and formed by the earth. And when we begin to dig a little deeper, I think it begins to change how we live our lives as Jews, and it also how we change how we affect the world and how we treat the world as human beings. And so earth-based Judaism is a cultural lens on remembering something central to our Jewishness.
You know, one of the things that I find, and I'm thinking particularly of movements within Judaism that move away from rational Judaism, and the advent of the Jubu movement, where the vast majority of leaders of American Buddhist thought are people who were Jewish and became that. Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, those kinds of people. And this yearning within the community by some for something different than what's on offer on the Bima, in the Devars that people hear, in much of mainstream Judaism. The people that come to you for the experiences that you give them out in the desert and at retreat center, what are they coming with, and what happens to them as they start to connect more with that embodied kind of Judaism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thread, this very strong thread of Jewish leaders in the Buddhist movement, or Jews who have become part of the yoga culture, or various strands. I think that a substantial aspect of that is people really not finding aliveness, rootedness, embodiment inside of the synagogues and the communities where they grew up because of the PTSD factor, because it's essentially a traumatized tradition that's recycling disembodiment and over-rationalization. So you said it well, that there are movements of looking for less rational approaches. Now, I think that the mind is essential, and that the survival strategy of becoming over-rational is one of the aspects of what saved Judaism. But the work of Wilderness Torah and the belief that I carry is that we have to rebalance things once again. We have to be in our bodies as much as we are in our minds. We have to focus on our spirits and our souls. We have to really focus on the heart. And so, from the First Nations peoples, the earth-based indigenous peoples that I've encountered, I've found more balanced approaches to living human lives, community lives, and spiritual lives when people are connected to the earth, when they're connected to the elements, when they have a relationship to fire in a sincere and authentic way, when they have a relationship to water in a sincere and authentic way, when they have a relationship to the plants and the birds and the animals of their place, when they feel comfortable walking barefoot on the land and that's not scary or strange. And also when we can sit in discourse in the deep thought of our tradition. But earth-based Judaism is, with our youth, it's highly experiential. We have a Sunday school in the woods, Bechutz, that's entirely outdoors. So, as much as learning the ancient stories from the Torah and the traditions, we're getting them outside and communing with the trees and the birds, having adventures. The Bee Mitzvah rite of passage we have by nature. It's for our 11 to 13-year-olds. It's a 2-year journey. And rather than focusing on Hebrew Torah and prayer, the indoctrination process and the performative aspect of coming of age, which is beautiful. We have created B'Nature, which is more about going on the journey, the soul of each individual. What is there? How do we discover it? And how do we mark it with meaningful rite of passage? Going out and sitting with your own fire on all night long. Deep embodiment. And then with community, going out onto the land for many days, like Passover in the desert, which has become one of our hallmark gatherings for 5 days in the desert as a village, praying, eating, dancing, celebrating. And then Sukkot, reviving, probably, in my opinion, one of the most important ceremonies that our culture has all but forgotten. The Simcha Beit HaShoeva Hoshana Rabbah rain dance. That understand that Jews didn't just have a connection to the land, but that through our ceremony, prayer, and our very being and the offerings we made, we helped rebalance the climate of our upbringing. We were a part of keeping the climate in balance. In a time of great climate catastrophe that's here and increasing, what more important endeavor than to dig deep into our culture and understand how do we become part of the cultural, spiritual, and ecological solution, not just in the halls of Washington, D.C., or in the Canadian Parliament, wherever you all in Canada do your activism, but in the fields of wherever we live. And I'm not just talking about Jerusalem, although that is where the traditions arose. I'm talking about California. I'm talking about Toronto. I'm talking about New York, Los Angeles, wherever we are now. Buenos Aires, let us dance for the rain again. Let us remember that we are a part of the ecosystem. We are earthlings, and that's the deep work. It's personal healing, it's communal healing, and it's remembering on a deep cultural level what it means to be responsible human beings on planet Earth once again.
So part of the tradition, I remember I was talking to a group of Reform rabbis in Canada here about hashpa'ah, about spiritual counseling, because many of them found themselves, I find many rabbis really have been brought up in this scholarly approach, the rational approach, what is the three-letter root of that word, and it could mean this, and it could mean that, how many angels on the head of a pin, and these kinds of conversations, and I see the congregation yearning for something more. But when I spoke to them about this kind of earth-based idea, one of them thoughtfully stopped and said, well, that's pantheism, isn't it? That's worship of nature. We don't worship nature. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say that you got the wrong word, friend. The right word is panentheism. Right. And this is that God is in everything. That Jews, we worship one God, but to imagine that one God is some bearded person sitting on a throne in the sky is a kindergarten God. That's the God of 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, and you're missing the entire point if you still embrace that type of approach. The approach of Baal Shem Tov, the Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, the great Hasidic sage, and Baal Shem, master of the name, which means, in a sense, he's what the Siberian people would call a shaman, the kind of person who passed through the veils and understood the deep power of both nature but also of Torah. That that God is in this world, that if I'm holding a water bottle in my hand, that not just the water contains God, but the bottle itself is somehow an emanation of God, that when you're talking to a person, that person is an emanation of God. So too are the trees, the birds, the streams, the mountains, even the skyscrapers, built by the ones who are B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. We are all created in that image. So when we have forgotten that the world, in a sense, we're just looking at the garments of God, when we forget that, then we forget the deep truth, and we're unable to provide the deep care, and we end up in the situation we are in. But Judaism, throughout its history, understood and forgot that God is in all these things, and we're remembering again.
And then there's the idea of every Friday turning towards the door and hoping that the bride of Sabbath appear and the feminine divine exists it seems so strange sometimes when I think about this idea that we are in a religion that has in exile its feminine form, and what effect that has on our ability to do what you were just talking about, to connect to the idea that everything is God and that there is within the life force of the planet and the life force of the universe, there is the idea of what is actually meant by divine. Why are we a people who have created this idea that the feminine, the Shekhinah, the feminine is not welcomed at this point in what we do by the religion?
Yeah, well, I think that, Ralph, you're asking one of the central questions. And, the way I would say it is maybe it's not why is it not welcome, but why do we continue to believe that we're in exile? And the story of exile is one of the core stories of Jewish formation. And when exactly that begins, maybe we get different opinions, but my belief system, what I've come to understand is that when the Second Temple fell in 70 CE at the hands of the Romans, the taproot of the tree of the Hebrew people was cut very violently, very swiftly, and in some ways almost completely. And that we were scattered from the roots of our earth-based creativity and upbringing. And one could judge that as something horrible in time, or one might look at it as an interesting artifact of history. But regardless of how we look at it through history, we have to understand that we were cut from our core connection. And then if we look at the diaspora and the exile and the wandering through Spain and France and Italy, eventually in a very deep way, settling in Poland, Russia, as well as other parts of the world, Jews spread to the four directions. But we did so in a very ungrounded kind of way. And as I referred to earlier, the intellectualization of Judaism was a profound survival strategy. The Talmud was written between 200 CE and codified around 500 CE. And the way I think about the Talmud is the written discourse of the rabbis during those early years, which began about 130 years after the destruction of the temple with the codification of the Mishnah, the first writings of Jewish tradition. And then for 300 years, the rabbis discoursed on that, discoursing on tradition, on legal aspects, on stories, and codified that into this profound and deeply intellectual and almost impossible to understand unless you spend years cracking the code. So you have to go to rabbinical school and beyond, to get access to the Talmud. And of course, that's changing with the technology of Safari online and the opening up of the Talmud, etc. But that was an incredible survival strategy. Like, thank God the rabbis did that. And it left us deeply, deeply in our minds, so that to be a wisdom keeper inside of Jewish tradition, the way was to go learn for years upon years upon years, to just grasp the immensity of Jewish tradition. And now it's time to open that up. And it poses a challenge, because how can you both learn the studied tradition and also embody the studied tradition? It's a challenge of our time, but we have to balance these aspects out.
Don't take half measures when it comes to home security. Alarms and cameras work, but they'll only tell you that your worst nightmare just came true. Safety Screen by Metalex for windows and doors will keep your family safe and sound with real stopping power. They can't be cut, pried, or bashed in, so you can enjoy carefree ventilation in the spring and fall with peace of mind. And protect your fixed windows and doors with rock glass, an absolutely unbreakable clear covering. Call 416-638-2539 or visit metalexsecurity.com to book your free consultation. That's METALEX security.com. Remember, prevention is always better than the cure.
I'm writing a book right now on climate crisis as a spiritual crisis. That we are I guess I tend to think of Martin Buber and an I and thou relationship to the earth and to our relationships to each other, and the I and it that we really are living in this society. How does your Wilderness Torah deal with this idea of spirituality and climate?
Yeah, thank you. I want to return to the last question because I feel like I gave half the answer and I realizing I left out the
All right.
juice. And then we'll come to climate because it's all connected, of course. But I wanted to say that the feminine aspect, which you led me into discussing, and I sort of got, I spoke up to the point where I began speaking about that. But that's the essence, in a sense. The return to an earth-based Judaism in its essence is a returning to an understanding that the feminine was in exile. What does that mean? First, it means, we often speak of the earth as Mother Earth. When we leave that relationship to the mother, the one who suckles us, in this case as a people, that is traumatic. And there is always a yearning to return back to the mother. When we leave our place, a place that is the place of our upbringing. Let's say you live in a home for the first 20 years of your life, and then a fire destroys it, or you move across the country because of work opportunities or the artifacts of modernity. That's a deep impact. In Judaism, the mystics of Sfat, the Kabbalists, they deeply understood this, and they spoke about the Shekhinah, which, as you said, is the embodiment, the divine presence, the feminine presence of the divine, the indwelling presence, that the Shekhinah is in exile. But I actually think that when they said that, they got it exactly wrong. What they actually, I think, meant to say, or what they should have said perhaps, is that we are in exile from her. In the Kabbalah Shabbat tradition, the Friday night service, that's from the medieval period. The mystics created that Friday night service, and one of the traditions that you referred to is when after you sing Lecha Dodi, we open the doors and we rise and we say Boi Kala, come the bride, and that they made a metaphor of the bride to the Shekhinah, the indwelling presence. And it's not that we believed that she's going to come walking in, but it's rather we stand up and we open the door and we say, now let us remember the thing that we forgot. Because human beings are the great forgetters, as Martin Prechtel says. We are the great forgetters. And so we need things to remind us. So we stand up and we turn towards the door and open up and look outside the synagogue or wherever we're praying. And we say, wow, she's actually here. And we're actually not in exile. That's an old story. That's an old trauma response. We have to heal. We have to remember. We have to regain our connection. As much as it is physical and related to the earth, as much as it is spiritual and remembering the truth that no, we actually are here, and she, the quote, the she in quotes is here. We also have to remember that this process of exile was also part of a process of patriarchy and deep control of male-bodied people through time, and that Judaism, in its studied and beautiful tradition, has become overly male-dominated in its leadership and overly masculine in its approach. The intellectualization is one example. And so another deep aspect of remembering and returning to an earth-based approach is to balance our leadership and balance our approach with the feminine. Female voices on the bima, female voices, in our podcasts, in our writings, but also more feminine approaches. So become more balanced in ourselves, such as being more in our body, as I've said before. Now this, and I'll now turn to the climate, if you don't mind, Ralph. But this,
Of course.
I think that one of the challenges of the environmental movement, and I'm an environmentalist, at least I have been, and I went to law school in order to become an environmental lawyer, and I fought on the tip of the sword of the environmental movement. I focused on agriculture and organic food, and confronting the genetically modified food industry and Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer and DuPont and that whole world. But it's all connected. But one of the pieces I realized along the way is that I was spiritually underdeveloped to be doing that work. And in fact, the work of fighting against the things that are slowly destroying our world is one important aspect. But the cultural aspect of remembering and re-embodying is what will fuel the deep activism. So I refer to Joanna Macy, who said it really, really beautiful. Joanna Macy is a elder from the Bay Area, who's now late in her life. She's an amazing human being, and she speaks of the Great Turning. And she said the Great Turning will require three pillars: the activism, like lawyers who fight, and activists who fight and stop the bleeding and convince politicians to do things that need to happen, etc. There's economic and structural change, new ways of farming, new ways of getting energy, new economic systems, etc. And the third thing is the cultural change work that drives the activism and the economic and political change. So in terms of climate, we have to remember to become Earth people once again. And then from that place, do the pieces of the climate work that are needed, whether it's renewable energy, conservation, new technology, policy in the places where policy is made, etc. And in Judaism in particular, we have so much tradition around being climate-oriented activists culturally. As I spoke before, we lived in the Levant, in the place in the Middle East where it's dry, it's desert, and where we live and died by the rainfall. And in the years when or the 7-year cycles when it didn't rain, we confronted famine, and we perished along with the other peoples, the other indigenous peoples in that area. And we have deep tradition on how to pray for rain, and also on culturally how to confront processes when the climate gets out of balance. One entire book of the Talmud, Ta'anit, it's about fasting and how we fast when there isn't enough rain. So the deep culture will inform the deep activism and the structural change, and that, I think, is the essence of what it means to be earth-based Jewish people in the time of climate change.
One of the aspects that you just touched on with activism and where it intersects with other things, I've thought a lot about the idea that there's a lot of conversation in Judaism right now about tikkun olam, repair of the world, and yet I keep thinking that that's not the first step. The first step is tikkun hanefesh, that if we don't repair the soul, then we're just the guy on the other side of the sidewalk with the sign screaming, "You're an idiot," at the other person, and which has never really changed anybody. It's kind of a non-starter after idiot. But I wonder when you're working with people, do you have a desired destination that you would like to take them to in terms of the things you're talking about and these ideas of how to repair oneself in an effort to repair the world around them?
Yeah, beautifully said, Ralph. I'm going to take that with me. Tikkun HaNefesh, and that might even be an order to it. Tikkun HaNefesh, repairing of the soul, which connotes individuals. Then Tikkun Ha'am, the repair of the people. And then, so each people on earth can look at itself from within and say, how do we need to repair our relationship? What if the Jewish people did that, and the Christian people did that, and the Muslim people did that, and the Buddhist people did that, and each nation did that, etc.? What a transformation. And then we have Tikkun Olam. Then we can work together to repair the world. My goal is probably more of a process than a destination. But I would say that there are some key aspects. Number one, I would say that we each have to really remember in a deep way the simple truth of the Hebrew in the Genesis story, that each person is an earthling. And it's not an idea, it's an experience. So you can't just have this intellectual experience, you have to walk it and embody it. And that's a long walk for most people in modernity. But Adam, the original person, the earthling, is connected to adamah, the earth. And the translation of Adam to Adam is a King James translation. It's a bad translation. We should always translate that word Adam as earthling. And it does not connote a gender. It's not a man. The original Adam is a hermaphroditic being that was from the earth. And if we could understand that all people, regardless of any kind of identity, has that in common, that we are from the earth, that we are made of the earth, that we have water running through our body, that fire animates us, that our air breathes us, we are, that is the essence. If we can deeply remember that by walking and spending time in nature and slowly remembering this in an embodied way, in a soul way, then tikkun hanefesh can happen. The other piece that is so critical, and this is one of the other pieces I've learned from indigenous peoples, the Lakota people in particular, that I've had the deep opportunity to have a relationship with through several family lines, is that when individual people in communities and societies remain uninitiated into the culturally appropriate way into their life stages, that they become destructive people. So
Give me an example of that.
Donald Trump is a really nice example of a human being in an elder man's body, who probably didn't make it out of adolescence psycho-spiritually. He has other issues going on, but I think a key issue is that he wasn't initiated. A counterpoint, Barack Obama was initiated into manhood very consciously by his elders, his grandmother in particular. But he had a community that understood the value of initiation. He was initiated. So the former Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, who by most measures is a fairly conservative politician, during the lead up to the Glasgow talks on climate change, he was out publicly speaking about that the deep issue with climate change today, yes, it's technological. Yes, it's about CO2 and methane. And yes, it's about energy production and consumption and conservation, all these things. But he said, in its essence, what it really is about, it's about initiation. And that if human beings remain uninitiated and remain self-centered, adolescent, destructive people, we will continue to destroy the world as we are doing. And I thought that was amazing. If Boris Johnson was speaking about that, then I was like, wow, little old me, hanging out in coastal California, I'm actually onto something. And that if we actually had the capacity, understanding, and scale to help individual people become initiated into each life stage, from childhood into adolescence, that's what the bar mitzvah does in Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
But then most importantly, from adolescence into adulthood, which Judaism does not have an initiation for that. Never did, as far as I know, except maybe the chuppah, the wedding, but that's not really an initiation, especially not now when so many people don't get married. But what does it mean to become initiated from adolescence to adulthood? Well, the hallmark characteristic of being an adolescent is being self-centered. And that's psychologically appropriate. You're discovering yourself. You're finding out who you are. You're learning about your body. You're learning about your sexuality. You're learning about what you like and don't like and da-da-da-da-da. But if we stay in suspended adolescence, that we stay self-centered, we continue looking at our navel-gazing experience, and all we care about is me, me, me. What do I get? That leads to consumerism, capitalism, overconsumption, destruction. It's a tragedy of the commons. What we have to do is we have to remember to initiate our adolescence into adulthood, to remember that it's not about them at the center. Who's at the center now? Well, we have to put the earth at the center. We put the children at the center. We put the elders at the center. And that's what intact indigenous societies across the planet have done since human beings have been on planet Earth. And this is an aspect that we have deeply, deeply forgotten. And then there has to be initiations into elderhood, because without elders, the adults, those who've been initiated, they don't have the grounding force they need. So those of us who are entering into our 60s, 70s, 80s, wherever it is appropriate, we need to be initiated in elderhood. So Wilderness Torah provides innovative initiation at the B mitzvah stage, but we are also in the process of developing elder initiations coming this year, as well as adulthood initiation journeys. And this is as important as anything, to remember how to be conscious, healthy adults and healthy, conscious culture on planet Earth today.
Yeah, my jam is the elder initiation at this point, and realize there's I think Carol Osborne is her name. She had a wonderful line about the work itself, which was moving from role, R-O-L-E, to soul. And how do we do that? And what kind of honor is there in being an elder instead of being a senior getting discounts at Walgreens or Shoppers here in Canada or whatever? but just trying to find a path, because we now live longer than we've ever lived. And what are we to do with that time, and what is society to do with us as we get into that phase of our lives? And there's very little initiation in that aspect as well. That there's, for many, there's just not a bridge to cross. They don't know how to get there from here. There are people, I did a group of men at a synagogue in Toronto a while ago, and the consensus in the group, there was about 13 or 15 men. And at one point, one of them said, and he took out his business card, and he said, so this is who we are. And the minute you take away my business card, there's no me. So I can't stop being this card. And I'd like to figure out how. So there was a really wonderful spirit in that. Some of the courses you offer are online, right?
Sure, yeah.
Tell me about that whole world, that people who aren't coming out to California can experience what you're doing with Wilderness Torah. How do people get engaged?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Ralph. So it's sort of new. I just transitioned from being the executive director of Wilderness Torah. This is my 18th year now since the founding of Wilderness Torah with a small group. And part of my new role as the director of spirituality and education is to help develop and offer a new online set of online offerings. And it remains to be seen exactly what they will be. But we will begin with offering a whole variety of online opportunities. I have a meeting later today to solidify the ultimate plan, but the kinds of things we're talking about doing include irregular monthly gatherings that people can become members of to touch on the power of the Hebrew calendar as the Jewish nature operating system, and how we connect with the Hebrew month, the holidays that are within that month, what's happening in the ecology and the natural cycle at that time, what's happening spiritually for ourselves, and how we integrate all of that. Earth-Based Judaism 101, it's a class I love to teach. We'll be offering that again, just the basics of what does it mean to remember that Judaism is an earth-based tradition. Talking
How
about,
do you,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, it's occurred, how, or have you had, and you must have had the conversations about how to scale Wilderness Torah, how to make it so that there's a Canadian chapter of Wilderness Torah, there's an English, that you have some model that doesn't require an enormous Herculean task to get it off the ground and a ton of money. Have you given thought to that, how to scale Wilderness Torah into something that can touch more people? Because the physical presence can be extremely powerful, and more so than the online. But give me some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's definitely true. We're talking about an embodied experience, so taking it online is somewhat paradoxical. But we believe that the thinking and the learning, along with the kinds of exercises and invitations to do embodiment, can provide a powerful experience. In terms of scaling, we have thought about it, and we are taking steps currently to scale one particular program as the beginning. Wilderness Torah did, and I'll tell you about that, but back almost 10 years ago, for 2 years, we offered what was called the Wilderness Torah Training Institute. And it was a 1-week immersive experience in the mountains of the Santa Cruz Mountains of California. And we went through all the basic teachings that we could around Earth-Based Judaism, the use of the Hebrew calendar, different approaches to Jewish prayer in nature, embodied, approaches to mentoring, and a whole curriculum. And we found that people took that curriculum out and launched, spin-offs that were particular to their community or organization, etc. And that was really exciting. We are now developing a more targeted scaling approach to one of our programs. And the program is called Neshama Quest. Neshama means soul. Quest is, it's a quest. And Neshama Quest is basically a week-long backpacking trip with some of the best and brightest mentors in Wilderness Torah, taking people out for a week of being deep in the wilderness. In our case, we take them to the Sierra of California, into some very stunning mountain environments, to play and pray together, to build community together, and to commune in a deep way, including some solo time, some prayer time, learning about Jewish tradition, and having a expansive, awe-inspiring time in the mountains. We are beginning to look with Jewish Federations of North America how to scale that program. And the director of that program, Itamar Cohen, worked for Outward Bound for many years, and he is leading the charge on how to scale that program. And if we can successfully scale that program, then we'll see. And the aim would be to train people to learn how to do that and then take it into their home communities, rather than Wilderness Torah owning the program. So it's really a train the trainer idea, and that's how we want to begin scaling this in various places.
You did Outward Bound when you were a kid, didn't you?
I did. That's a very good memory. Or maybe you saw that. I did. I was an Outward Bound. Not only did I do Outward Bound, I was an Outward Bound instructor in Colorado at the turn of the millennia, right before I went to law school. So in 1999 and 2000, I was an Outward Bound instructor in Colorado. And, it's actually one of the moments where I really began to understand myself and my gifts as a leader and the power of the wilderness and how I came alive in the wilderness, and how as a mentor, that's where I did my best work. And I never forgot that. And when I went to law school, became a lawyer, did the law thing, and then discovered that I was off my path, I remember some of those experiences, and it helped me come back to doing what my soul was really here to do.
Well, I'm very happy that you made that journey and crossed that bridge and do the work you do now. I've always been honored to know that you and I for a while crossed paths doing our program together, and that since then you've had a family and children and all those wonderful things, and you've grown this beautiful community. And I wish you nothing but the best. It's wildernesstorah.org, I believe. Is that right?
Yep.
So if people want to find out more about it, wildernesstorah.org. And I thank you for the time you spent with me just now.
Yeah, Ralph, thank you so much. It's great to reconnect, and I appreciate you asking the really powerful questions that led to this great conversation.
Rabbi Zelig Golden is now the creative director, the curator, as it were, of Wilderness Torah, and you can find him and the work that they all do at wildernesstorah.org. I'm Ralph Benmergui. This is Not That Kind of Rabbi, and I thank you for taking the time to listen, and take care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for listening to Not That Kind of Rabbi. If you enjoyed your time with us, we'd love for you to subscribe to this show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Ralph Benmergui. Our show is produced and edited by Michael Freeman. We're part of the CJN Podcast Network, and to support our work with a tax-deductible donation, all you have to do is visit thecjn.ca/donate. Take care of each other. Bye.